With the death of Pope Francis on Easter Monday, it is time this week to elect a new pope. It's always an exciting and unique time in the church where we have no pope and the whole world is waiting to see who gets elected. It's only the third time in my life where we have had a papal election. So I thought that I would take the opportunity to talk about what happens during an election. You have no doubt heard about it on TV or social media, but a lot of that can be either intentionally misinformation or just mistaken. So I thought that I would go through the election process step by step. So sometime in the next few days, beginning on Wednesday, the cardinals will elect the 267th Pope, the 266th successor of St. Peter. Now, the only qualification that a person technically needs to have in order to be elected Pope is, number one, you have to be baptized, you have to be a Christian, and number two, you have to be a man. There is no age requirement. You don't even have to be a priest to be elected the Pope. And the most classic example of this was the election of Pope Fabian, he was a man named Fabian who was visiting Rome during a time when they couldn't decide who to elect as the next Pope. A dove landed on Fabian's head, and they took this to mean that this was a sign from the Holy Spirit that he was to be elected, and so they did. He was elected, he was ordained a priest, and he was Pope until his martyrdom 14 years later. He was put to death by the Roman Emperor Decius in the year 250, and he died as a martyr and a saint. So it turned out that the Holy Spirit was right. But even with that remarkable story in mind, it has been 636 years since the Pope elected was not one of the cardinals who were casting their ballots. The oldest Pope ever elected was Boniface VI. He was 90 years old when he was elected in the year 896. The oldest Pope to ever live was Benedict XVI, who died at 95 years old in 2022. And normally, throughout history, popes remain in office until they die, but also on 11 occasions, popes have resigned or retired, some of them by force. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI was the first pope to resign since Gregory XII in the year 1415. And I suppose this could be more of a common thing since people live much longer than they used to. Our bodies often give out before our death. The longest a pope has ever served was the first pope, St. Peter. He was pope for 34 years, from the year 30 AD to the year 64 AD. The longest modern pope had ever served was Pope Pius IX, who served for 31 years and 7 months from 1846 to 1878. St. John Paul II was the longest serving 20th century pope who was pope for 26 years and 5 months from 1978 to 2005. The shortest tenure ever for a pope was Urban VII, who was pope from September 15th to September 27th in the year 1590, so 13 days. And of course, a lot of you remember Pope John Paul I was only in office from August 26th to September 28th in 1978, only 33 days. Most of the popes throughout history have been Italian, and this is because their main job is to be the Bishop of Rome. And so they often will elect a Roman or an Italian as their bishop. But since the Pope is also the spiritual leader of all Catholics across the world, he has often been elected from all kinds of different countries. There has been one Pope from England, one from Argentina, that's Pope Francis, one from Poland, that would be John Paul II, one from Sicily, 2 from Portugal, 2 from Croatia, 3 from Israel, including St. Peter, 3 from Africa, 5 from Sardinia, 5 from Syria, 7 from Germany, including Pope Benedict XVI, Pope Francis' predecessor, 9 from Greece, 17 from France, and 206 of the 266 were from Italy. Notice 0 from the United States. And I always find it hilarious that the American media, they'll have the front runners for the Pope. And they'll always have to have an American on there for some reason, even though, just to kind of put things in perspective, there's 1.4 billion Catholics on earth, and represented by 135 cardinals who will be voting for the next pope, and there's only 62 million Catholics in the United States. That's 4% of the entire church. So We are not very well represented in most of the church, especially the growing parts of the church are not in the United States. The Catholic Church in the U.S. is, sorry to say, it's barely a blip on the world's radar when it comes to Catholicism. So don't expect an American pope. Anything is possible, but I wouldn't even give it more than a 1% chance. So here's how the election goes. A new pope is elected after the pope dies or resigns. And you may have heard that, the part of the ceremony of determining the death of the pope is they take a silver hammer and knock him on the head with it. That stopped after Pope Pius IX in the 1870s, so it hasn't happened for over 100 years. But anyways, all the cardinals in the world are given 15 days to get to Rome to elect the new pope. Currently, there are 252 cardinals in the world. All the cardinals can attend the vote, but only those under the age of 80 can actually cast a ballot. However, even though they can't vote, there is nothing preventing any of the 80-plus-year-olds from actually being elected as the next pope. So the election happens at the Vatican City inside the Sistine Chapel. All of you have no doubt seen photos of the Sistine Chapel. Leroy and Judy have been inside of it. In terms of size, the Sistine Chapel is about the same width as a parish hall, but it's about twice as long. It's a lot taller, too. It's not that big, really. The Sistine Chapel is named after Pope Sixtus IV, who was the pope that built it. And every inch of the ceiling and most of the walls is covered in frescoes that were painted into wet plaster by the great Renaissance master Michelangelo. And this is what the Sistine Chapel is most famous for, apart from being the place where the Pope is elected, is these paintings. Some of the most famous images from the Vatican are found in those paintings. The election of a pope takes place at what is called a conclave. This comes from the Latin words con and clave, which means with a key. And this is because the cardinals are locked into this room while they're voting. The whole chapel is searched for recording devices. This is a sealed secret meeting where only the cardinals themselves are allowed in. There are no cameras allowed. The doors of the chapel are sealed with wax, so if the seal is broken, they know if someone has entered or exited the room. And why all the secrecy? Well, the idea here is that the cardinals are not influenced in their vote by the outside world. They don't have access to traditional media, to social media, or the internet. And they can, in fact, if they reveal a whole lot that happens during the conclave, actually be excommunicated from the church as a breach of this secrecy. They actually take an oath of secrecy. They spend a lot of time, the cardinals do, in prayer. They ask for the guidance of the Holy Spirit in order to make the right choice. Now, I'm about to do something very dangerous. For the next 6 minutes, I'll be talking about politics. And this is your warning, but remember, I'm the messenger, just telling you what happens during a conclave. I'm not telling you how to vote, I'm just explaining how the cardinals will vote. So I had people asking whether or not the next pope is going to be a conservative. And I'm going to disappoint a lot of you that that's not really the way that things go. That's not really the right way to think of things. If you think a pope is going to conform the decisions that he makes to the idea that we have as Americans in politics, which is highly polarized and highly divisive and highly volatile and highly changeable, then you're going to be disappointed in who the next pope is elected. Now remember that the United States is only 4% of the Catholics in the world. The church is not that concerned with our politics. Politics are not the same elsewhere in the world as they are in the United States. In fact, the words progressive and conservative don't even mean the same thing in other parts of the world. The rest of the world does not think the same way that Americans do. Politics do not work the same way, and cultures can be completely different. And on top of that, the office of the Pope, while it has political elements to it, is not about politics. Thank God. The Pope is elected. It is about who can best lead the church into the future so that the gospel can reach as many people as possible. It isn't about conservative or liberal. When compared to American politics, the gospel is always going to be conservative on certain issues. For example, the church will always defend life from conception to natural death, no matter what. When compared to American politics, the gospel is always going to be liberal on some issues, especially social issues like caring for the poorest of the poor, including immigrants. Here's a famous quote from a church leader who said, "The bread that you do not use is the bread of the hungry. The garment hanging in your wardrobe is the garment of him who is naked. The shoes you do not wear are the shoes of the one who is barefoot. The money you keep locked away is the money of the poor. The acts of charity that you do not perform are the injustices that you commit." Now, that sounds like something that Pope Francis said last month, but in fact, this is from St. Basil the Great, who lived 1,650 years ago. The church has never changed on these things, and it never will change on these things. We have the same 7 corporal works of mercy that we've always had: feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, clothing the naked, sheltering the homeless, visiting those in prison, caring for the sick, and burying the dead. Now, this might make some of us frustrated or upset, but the church has never changed her stance on these things. America has, certainly. Up until the 1920s, when people were scared that too many Catholics were immigrating to the United States, America was pretty open-doored in its immigration policy. Our borders were quite welcoming to the poor and the refugees until America got a little too Catholic. And that's, how my grandmother got here from the Czech Republic. Thank God she made it here. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. If you desire to see a resurgence of Catholic culture in the United States, I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss the developing world, because that's where the Catholicism is actually flourishing in the world. And on top of all of that, it is, in fact, official Catholic teaching to care for those who are most in need. When it comes to the popes, I would say that the major differences come down to sort of the style of how they govern, the emphasis that they place on certain things. So instead of thinking in terms of conservative or liberal, a better way to think of the popes would be administrative or pastoral. And what I mean by that is, for example, Pope Benedict XVI, probably my favorite pope in my lifetime, but he was more of an administrative pope. Benedict was a scholar. He spent his entire life working in the Vatican, and his papacy reflected that. The reason why some of the things that Pope Francis said and did were so jarring to us is that he was the first pope in literally hundreds of years who had ever been a pastor, who had ever been, a bishop of a diocese. And as a bishop of a diocese and as a pastor, he was most naturally concerned with the things that a pastor is naturally concerned with: caring for those who are most in need, appealing the gospel message to as many people as possible. That's my job as a pastor. And then you have someone like John Paul II, who was both. He was pretty much down the middle. He was both an administrator and a pastoral pope. And just like Pope Francis, he had his disagreements with American presidents. Just like Pope Francis has his disagreements with President Trump, John Paul II didn't necessarily get along with President George W. Bush or President Bill Clinton. So to summarize, popes aren't concerned with American politics. They aren't worried about the national security policy of another nation. They're most concerned with the gospel. And I know that by talking a little bit about politics, I run the risk of upsetting people, but I promise I'm not saying this to make anybody mad. I'm just trying to explain the perspective of those who are voting this week of what they'll actually be concerned with. And it's not American politics. So back to the conclave. The cardinals stay in Rome in the same apartment building altogether until a new pope was elected. And it's a pretty simple apartment building. I read an article saying that it was purposely designed to be a 3 out of 5 stars just so that people could get on their way and get done with the election. The longest that a conclave has ever lasted was from November of the year 1268 to September of the year 1271, so 3 years. And this is because the Italian cardinals and the French cardinals could not get along. If you know your church history, bad things happened after that. But in terms of the shortest election, there was, of course, the election of St. Peter, who took only 1 vote. Jesus said yes. And the shortest conclave, though, was in 1939 when Pope Pius XII was elected after only 3 rounds of voting, 2 days. The conclave itself begins with a Mass that is dedicated to the Holy Spirit, that God, the Holy Spirit, might guide their decision. And then they go into the Sistine Chapel, and one by one they take an oath of secrecy. This is a promise that they will not provide any information to the media or to anyone outside of the conclave. Even after the conclave is finished, it's very rare that you hear information about what actually happened during the conclave. After the oath of secrecy is made, the voting begins. So in order to be elected pope, a cardinal needs to have 2/3 of the votes. As I said, out of the 250 or so cardinals in the world, 135 of them are eligible to vote. So that means that exactly 90 votes will be needed to elect a new pope this week. On the first day of voting, they vote only once. They have the big Mass, the Holy Spirit, and they go and they make their oath of secrecy, and then they vote. On the second day of voting, and every day after that, there's 4 votes every day, 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. And it kind of in between, they get together and they talk about things, they have conversations. The casting of a ballot is done individually. Each cardinal votes by writing a name in capital letters on a card. The capital letters help from being able to tell who the handwriting belongs to. And each cardinal goes up one by one to the front of the Sistine Chapel, and they place their ballot into a large urn. And then once the voting is done, so you have 135 votes, 3 cardinals are chosen at random to count the votes. And so the first cardinal takes the card, reads it to himself, hands it to the second cardinal, who then reads it to himself, who hands it to the third cardinal, who reads it out loud to everybody. And these are just triple checking a way to make sure that the vote is accurate. Also, as they're being counted, the cards are threaded through with a needle and thread so that the ballots can't accidentally be counted twice. And then once they've done that, they undo the needle and thread and they count them all again just to make sure. And so you can probably see why they can only vote up to 4 times a day. This would take a long time. But after each unsuccessful vote, the ballots and all of the notes are taken and they are burned. And if they don't reach a 2/3 majority after 13 days, or after 13 votes, so there'll be 4 days of voting, they stop for prayer and they stop for discussion after each vote until the conclave is finished. Now, once a cardinal has received 2/3 of the votes, the dean of the College of Cardinals, who's sort of like a temporary administrator in between popes, he asks the person who has been elected if they accept the vote. And the cardinal who has received 2/3 of the vote can either accept the results of the conclave or they can reject the results of the conclave. And if he doesn't accept the vote, it means that he turns down being the pope and his name is no longer cast. If he says, "I accept," at that moment, that is when he becomes the pope. Now, something that's also very different from American politics is that nobody campaigns to be the pope. In fact, they'll do the opposite. They'll say why they don't want to be pope. This is not a desired position within the church. Some cardinals have hinted that during the conclave that elected Benedict XVI in 2005, that the voting initially looked as if the 2/3 of the vote was going to be achieved for Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio of Argentina. But during that conclave, Cardinal Bergoglio informed the voting cardinals that if he was elected, he would not accept the vote. And so they elected Pope Benedict XVI instead. And well, the joke was on Cardinal Bergoglio because he was elected Pope Francis in the next conclave. So you don't want to be Pope. After getting dressed up as the Pope for the first time in the white cassock, Pope St. John the 23rd was known to have said, "Look what they have done to me." As a priest, you get ordained to be a pastor, to heal, to save souls. You don't get ordained to be an administrator. When you're ordained, you lay down your life, but that is taken to the extreme with the Pope, who every second of every day of their life is planned and accounted for, most oftentimes by the people that are not you. It is, as Jesus warns Peter in the gospel that we just heard today, you used to dress yourself and go where you wanted, but when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. As a pastor, I am responsible for every soul within the boundaries of my parish, which is about 1,000 square miles. Now, I mean every soul, not just every member of this church, not just every Catholic, but every soul, Protestant, Catholic, Jew, Muslim, atheist, or otherwise. I must dedicate my life to bringing Christ to them, and I will be judged at the end of my life by God for how well or how poorly I did that. You can say the same thing about a bishop, but instead of one parish, it's possibly hundreds of parishes that a bishop is responsible for. And as for the Pope, he is responsible for being the face of the church to the entire world. And so, many souls can be won, and more importantly, many souls can be lost because of what a pope says or does. So when you're elected pope, you become in a way responsible for the spiritual well-being of every living soul on earth. And that pope will be judged accordingly. Nobody wants to be pope. If that person did want to be pope, they most surely would never be elected or considered for election. During each round of voting, there are thousands of people outside of St. Peter's Square waiting for the news of the new pope, and this is the part that everybody's familiar with, that the media always talks about. And the people can tell how the voting has gone by this teeny tiny little chimney that is on the roof of the Sistine Chapel. It's kind of hilarious because you would think, given its symbolic importance, in history, this chimney would be, gussied up and decorated like everything else in the Catholic Church, but it's not. It just looks like, it looks like a normal, ordinary wood-burning stove chimney. It's actually kind of janky. There's wires holding it up, and it's not even straight. It's kind of crooked. But, and yet the whole world focuses on this ordinary object, a chimney on top of a building, and like I said, it's kind of hilarious to think about. But when the ballots and the notes are burned, it produces black smoke, and this tells people that it has not been a successful vote. After the Pope is successfully elected, they burn incense instead, and that produces the white smoke, so that the entire world knows that a Pope has been elected. In less than an hour, they will meet him for the first time. So back inside the Sistine Chapel, the new Pope is asked what his new name would be, and this is a tradition that goes back to St. Peter, when Jesus changed his name from Simon to Peter. In the year 533 AD, a man named Mercury, like after the Roman god Mercury, understandably, he changed his name to John. And then another man after that was elected, but his birth name was Peter, and he didn't want to be called Pope Peter out of respect for St. Peter, and so he too took the name John. And then finally, in 1522, Pope Adrian VI was the last pope to use his actual name, and ever since then, popes have taken on a new name when elected. For example, as I already said, Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio changed his name to Francis. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger took the name Benedict XVI, and Karol Wojtyła took the name John Paul II. Then the Pope goes into the dressing room called the Room of Tears. As I said already, nobody wants to be Pope. This is not a happy turn of events in the life of the Pope. Just look at hence the name Room of Tears. If you go back to when Francis was elected, if you look at the TV feed from when he first comes out on the balcony of St. Peter's, he looks like a man who has seen his own ghost. He looks terrified, and for good reason. In the Room of Tears, the newly elected Pope dresses in one of the 3 white cassocks. I think they have a tall one, a short one, and a fat one for whatever fits best. When the new Pope goes back into the Sistine Chapel, after he gets dressed, he gives his blessing to all the cardinals. And then finally he makes his way out to the balcony at St. Peter's Square, where he gives a short address, and then he blesses the crowds outside. And to finish, he gives a blessing to the entire world. So this is known as the Urbi et Orbi blessing, which is Latin for to the city and to the world, where the Pope gives his blessing first to the city of Rome and then to the entire world. So when you're watching it live on TV this week, make sure you're watching it live, first of all, so that you can receive the Pope's first blessing. It will likely, I would assume, not be the quickest conclave ever, so we'll probably be watching for a couple of days. I'd imagine that there'll be lots of speculation, but as we go into this week, please pray for the cardinals, especially for the one that they elect as the next Holy Father. And we'll all be a part of this historic moment in world history.